And this far out, I can see that all my weeping and gnashing was my attempted moral superiority, dragging you down so I could say, look at the state of me. Truly I say to you, it wasn't hatred, it was near idolatry. I do have cold feet, not because, not for you, it was for me. Going back to earlier that year, one of the colleges I had applied to had selected some prospective students to invite to a scholarship event included with their acceptance letter. It was basically a tryout for a full ride with the obligation of being a school representative. Trevor and I opened our acceptance emails together in engineering class. He switched from relief from acceptance to being upset he didn't get invited as well, but altogether didn't care too much. My date was set. It was great to have an approved reason to miss school, the very first day of February. It took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to get downtown, the worst I've ever experienced. For some reason, I listened to the overpreparedness of my parents and gave myself 3 hours, so I ended up being 20 minutes early. It's a small campus, so even though I had never visited, navigating wasn't difficult. I checked in, got my name tag, and sat down nearby so I wouldn't have to go find myself a seat in the auditorium yet. What concerned me the most was how the weekend would turn out socially. The sole worry of if I would meet people. I didn't care about the interview comparatively. Being by myself on a school campus, that's what I wanted to escape from this weekend. Almost like I was testing myself, seeing if it was possible for me to be functional if I was away from home. That was the hope I had been holding on to for the past year. After graduation, I can reset in a new location. There's a tap on my shoulder.
Do you know where I should be checking in?
Everything is easier when I don't have to initiate. It gives permission to start a conversation later, and more importantly, it dusted off the part of my brain responsible for speaking to people. Now, all I had to do was maintain momentum. Sajni was extremely extroverted. She would be the link between me and everyone I met that weekend. I got out of my chair and brought her to the check-in, and then the both of us went to the auditorium, because by now it was time to start. Most of the introduction, we were writing notes on a paper bouncing between us, already making fun of the event. As soon as the presentation ended, we took off. A main element of this weekend was choosing how you wanted to spend your time, but each activity offered was limited in size. That's why we planned to be the first ones out of the door. We were easily able to get our first choice, but split up to do different things. I was off on my own until the afternoon. At no point did I try to talk to anyone besides the formalities of responding to "what's your name" and "what's your major?" As emo mode activated and the doubts of doom began to take hold, I see her with a group of people and am waved over. My group for the rest of the weekend. Sajni, Anek, Eddie. She would always disagree with me, but this is where we met. I didn't talk to her. As soon as she joined in the circle, she was off somewhere else. Sarah. Eddie and I were talking about modded Minecraft, only to be interrupted by an invitation to a frat party at one of the frat houses later that night. All of us planned to meet there, and when we arrived, we saw it had all the fixings of a frat party, complete with drunk kids singing Mr. Brightside. The 5 of us were sat on the floor in a side room getting to know each other, eventually playing 2 truths and a lie. For my turn, my lie was, I have been to Colorado, and they all thought it was, I have never gone pee in high school. The question was asked if any of us were set on going to school here. There are a couple Georgia Techs. I was unsure, but probably here. She was the only one set on attending, specifically because of the architecture program. Before everyone left, we exchanged contacts, and then, as a group, we dropped each person off at their host. Each visiting student had a current student in Greek life who gave them guidance around campus and a place to stay. Up to that point, I had talked to my guy twice. Once was in the preceding week to introduce ourselves, and the other was after leaving the party. I had just now checked my phone after hours. He was wondering when I would be ending my night. He later told me midnight was when he would have given up. I got there 1:45. In the morning, I got to meet and eat with the brothers. The blueberry casserole was probably the best thing I would eat in my entire career at that school. I had saved the Phenibut for today. There is no desire to go through the interview sober. I got dressed in my purple shirt, dress pants, dress shoes. I was ready to get this done. The discussion was like if you made beauty pageant questions for engineers. The rest of the day was relaxed because the whole reason for being there was now over with, and I was high. Our group from yesterday met up to go to the student recreational space. It was a crusty place, a basement mostly used by Smash players. Besides the gaming consoles, there were a few bowling lanes, tabletop games, arcade machines, and a small campus restaurant. While I was made fun of for how ungraceful and stiff I was while bowling, when I got on the DDR machine, the Phenibut did its magic. When I get high, I want to dance. It's the only time that happens thanks to lowered inhibitions. Now I'm locked in, grabbing the back bar, hitting perfect, increasing the song difficulty. They thought my shift in openness was weird, but I didn't get off the dance pad. Everyone would have to play against me. By the time I checked out the next morning, I felt great. Everything hoped for ended up happening. A proof that things could be different in college. Now returning home with a sliver of hope. Speeding down the highway, Everlong blasting. All euphoria. A group chat was made, which sustained itself for a while, but it of course petered out. Everyone is 1,000 miles away from each other. We only connected for a weekend. She's the only one I continue to talk to. Not consistently, but at least until we would meet at school. The first semester was my gilded age. Classes were enjoyable, homework was completed, I could sleep 3 hours a night and feel great the next day. I wasn't bored. Most importantly, I didn't feel out of place, and I didn't feel stuck. With her being one of the only people I knew, we would meet up at the Welcome Week events I actually decided on attending. Because I was rooming with Trevor, and both of us being cynical, it was easy to skip nearly every event, instead opting to wander around a new environment on our own. The both of us quickly realized the potential of the basement of our dorm. It housed laundry rooms connected by a maze of hallways, with perfectly smooth concrete floors. Over the summer, I learned how to use Heelys. He knew how to skate. We had ourselves a skate park. During Welcome Week, she invited me to her room to fill in a needed space for a board game. Her floor was having a hall-wide party, and her room served as a cool-down place for the non-drinkers. Something was off. Here I was, in a room full of women, and I wasn't inebriated. I was a little uncomfortable, but still acting like a functional person, not in lockup mode. It felt weird when they started talking about guys, like I was sitting in on a conversation. Even more so when they complimented me, saying that I was one of the good ones, with me responding, "I don't want to be that guy who only hangs out with girls." Most of my time there was spent cross-talking with her about D&D. After that night, we started to hang out in her room consistently. My birthday was within the first week of school, so when she stopped by to give me a gift, Trevor knew what was going on. As soon as she left,
She likes you. I don't know about that. She was only looking at and talking to you.
it was obvious he was right, and especially right about what he observed. The three of us were having a conversation, but Trevor was clearly on the outside. But since I'm the one in the situation, I still had doubts. It took a couple movie nights in her room to get anything out of me.
Are you going to kiss me?
And just like that, I didn't have to take the slightest risk and initiate. Part of what held me up is I had never kissed anyone before. I was upfront about that, but it didn't matter. And again, she led. My timidity never was a problem in our relationship because she took the reins and progressed things. It worked for both of us. I didn't know you asked if someone wanted to be your girlfriend. I figured it was assumed after you stuck around each other long enough. That was brought to my attention when we were alone on a beach at night, sitting on the rocks, and I get a similar question.
Are you going to ask if I want to be your girlfriend?
And sexually as well, it was her forwarding things, like shoving my head under her shirt while watching a movie, moving my hand to her ass, or grabbing my dick. It gave me permission. She probably knew at that point I needed explicit indicators, although sleeping together was unspoken. She would stay over on the weekends Trevor returned to our hometown. Lying in bed with someone is nice, but I hate it for actually sleeping. My mind is racing the entire time, and I want to accommodate them as much as possible. But my favorite moment of us together was once when she was sick and I went over to see her. I brought her ginger ale for an upset stomach, and then I held her as she fell asleep. But our only real argument, which was resolved the same night, was when she was sleeping over. Her period started when we were in bed, which left a blood stain. Blood doesn't gross me out, but it's an embarrassing thing to happen. She asked if I want her to stay, and I wouldn't give a straight answer, which she wanted, yes or no. Originally, I said whatever she wants to do. If she wants to go to her room, she should. But she kept pressing me for a real response, with me eventually saying yes, I want you to stay. The evasiveness was because I wanted to get actual sleep, which I knew wouldn't happen if she was around. But I realized I wasn't thinking about what she wanted. She wanted my affirmation, and that's why I said yes. The sheets were brought to the laundry room. We got up between wash and dry cycles, and once back, would fall asleep until we had to get up again. Sex is uncomfortable. Not because of her. I was extremely attracted to her. It's the self-loathing that gets in the way. The body image issues never left, they just occupied less of my mind. This made them take center stage. Throughout high school, I never wore shorts or t-shirts regardless of the weather. I would only wear t-shirts at home. And there had not been a situation where I was shirtless in years, besides changing in the school locker room, which is over within seconds. It's also weird for someone to do something sexual for me. The contradiction is that when someone likes me, what I'm attracted to will grow and adapt to them. But then I'll rewind the tape and realize this person likes me and get disgusted. It was the phase where you just enjoy being around each other even if you aren't doing anything. We would wait to do laundry together or would go to a second dinner in the Commons if the other person hadn't eaten yet. Free time on the weekends would be finding a new place to eat or watching something in my room, with most of the time Trevor sitting above us in the top bunk bed. I'm sure he loved that. If he needed to do anything, eat, pee, do laundry, he would have to get us to move because climbing the futon was his way of getting in and out of bed. There are many times she would try to get me to kick Trevor out for an hour, but I was too embarrassed to actually do it. And that's even when Trevor and I made an agreement when we moved in that we could kick each other out for that exact reason. Sometime in October, I get a message. She wants to talk. I've been riding the high of new experience and a new location, not thinking about her. Being in a relationship put me in a different mindset. I wasn't thinking of her wanting to talk in any romantic way, imagining it was just catching up. We had some difficulties actually getting each other to pick up the phone at the same time, running in circles of calling, calling back, and leaving voicemails. Eventually, I got through when I moved into the fire escape in my dorm. It was almost like a blank slate when we were talking. It was natural, like none of the terrible events of last summer happened. Like there's never a 3-month pause. College, home, homesickness. When she suggested she should come visit sometime, the intentions of her question did not cross my mind, but I gave a sure if you want to answer.
Are you in a relationship? Yeah, I've been seeing someone basically since I got here. I knew someone would get you.
Somehow, I don't know what question prompted it, when asked something related to that relationship, I said,
There's been a lot of firsts.
even after how much I dragged my feet with her, the meaning of what I was saying never crossed my mind. Speaking to her like a random friend, like we had no history. The tone shifted after that. Up to then, we had talked for an hour, but my comment quickly ended the conversation. It took another 2 months before I would torpedo my relationship. It happened like it had before. I started to feel inadequate about my ability to be in and continue a relationship. Those same worries of the other person eventually seeing me the same way I see myself, which hadn't been on my mind for months, returned in full force, manifesting in the same way it always does, feeling nothing for the other person, like I don't love them. The cognitive dissonance of how the other person feels about me and how I feel about myself. I can't understand what they see. The primacy of self-hatred demands I destroy anything to the contrary. I spent a few days back at my parents' house near Thanksgiving, conveniently giving me time away to ruminate and grow increasingly hopeless without any outside opinion. The fact that I was back in my hometown, the origin of my shortcomings, only expedited what was bound to happen. As I rode the train back into the city, I made up my mind. Trevor wouldn't be back for another day. I was doing it tonight. I called her to my room like any other occasion. It was blindsiding to a loving girlfriend who expected to spend time with her boyfriend who just returned, especially given that before I left there was no indication anything was wrong. Same routine. It was over quickly, partially because there wasn't much to say and partially because she left. There are always terrible feelings before and after, but it never deterred me. The next day, Trevor brought me a note stuck under our door addressed to me. Hey, it's me. There's still a lot that I wanted to say to you that I can't express to you in person without crying like a bitch right now. I'll miss you like crazy, but I respect your decision if what you think is... If it was... But I respect your decision if it's what you think is best for your mental health. If you made this decision only because of how you thought it would affect me, then I think you're wrong. I think it should be my decision if you're too much for me or if I can't handle you. I'm here for the whole package of Matthew, and that includes your illnesses. I'm here for you. I mean it. I'll always be here if you need me, even as just a friend if that's what you need. I'll also leave you be if that's what you need. Please take care of yourself. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. If you don't, just ignore this. Burn this immediately after reading. Leave no paper trail. Sarah Jane. P.S. Mental illnesses do make things hard in relationships, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it to try. I want you to try if you still want me. P.P.S. My handwriting sucks. Sorry. My mind was made up, but I felt like I needed to talk to her. I wrote a note of my own and brought it to her door. We met later that day. We sat on that crusty futon for a long time. Initially, it was hard to find anything to say to each other. I was stuck between shutting down and tears. I tried to explain this has happened before in past relationships, but she said she didn't want me to bring up past relationships. I felt dense for doing so. The issue of past relationships was the root of the problem we were now confronting, but the topic was insensitive, even if it was the only thing that made any sense in the situation I brought on us. There was some understanding, at least as much as there can be when you're trying to understand a delusion. She still wanted to stay in contact, to be
anything for you. If that means a friend or a girlfriend, whatever you need.
There were hugs, apologies, and eventually goodbyes. I knew I had to tell people about the breakup, but I really didn't want to. The worst was going to be the first, Trevor, and my mother. My parents had already met her when we both came up for a weekend, and this was the first relationship they knew about. The topic didn't come up until my mom asked how she was doing. Before that, I had been standing in the kitchen trying to gather the courage to initiate the conversation. It was a relief she did it for me. Trevor was different because I was willing to explain the why to him. Once again, me desperately trying to convince the other person that the problems I imagine have merit. It never really matters what the other person says to the contrary. Fall semester ended and I left for break. Everything was still fresh in my mind in that overpowering period accompanying an event's immediacy. But thoughts of breakup turned to something left unresolved. That phone call. Replaying the events, I imagined the conversation from the other end of the line. The realization of what I said compounded my existing feelings, a new target for obsessive thinking. It didn't take long for me to commit to the idea of apologizing. It was one of the first things I did after returning home. I messaged her, asked if we could talk. I said it wasn't immediate, but it was important to me. Returning to the past again, sitting in the neighborhood park, pulling on all those old memories, on that same bench, now waiting to call. Apologizing once never gives me resolution. I feel like I need to continually apologize as I continue to think about the issue. New thoughts, new reasons, new explanations. See, I did this because of this reason, and I'm this way because of what happened then, and I'm afraid of this because I feel this way. It never means much. Thankfully, I haven't broached the same issues with people, even when the fantasy persists to have multiple meta-conversations with the person involved about the events and how they felt and how they feel now. My house is not a place to have private conversations. It is completely open. Almost always you can make out a conversation in the basement from the upstairs unaided, and if not, the vents serve as a PA system for any event happening in the house. That's one of the reasons why I would always leave and didn't like having people over. Eventually, it became too cold for me to sit out in the park. I had been waiting on her, and I didn't know how much longer it would take. My car was the next best location. These confrontations are never easy. For me, initiating anything is painful. There's a long build-up to making a decision, followed by a week of worry leading up to the event, and the day of physical reaction. Each time I'm rolling around on the couch in the front room with an upset stomach, drinking too much water, desperately trying to pray for strength and ease, and singing whatever songs cross my mind. I'm a mess, and there's nothing I can say to myself to stop the anxious anticipation. The call was short and to the point. She had no idea why I would want to suddenly talk, so I had to assure her everything was all right. I had never apologized for last summer. The mess I'd made, being inconsiderate, all my deficiencies I put on full display, and that call and the words I chose. She said it was fine. She was over it. There is a sadness in that moment, seeing the imbalance of significance. It's one of the main barriers I have to apologizing, bringing an event to the forefront that doesn't even cross their mind. The other person's indifference is apparent before we have the conversation, yet when I finally hear it, it feels like a rejection of me.
Are you still in a relationship? No, I've got some things to work out with myself.
Most of winter break was spent in isolation trying to analyze how I interacted with people and how I should interact with people. The concern was the difference in how I communicate, more accurately, how I don't communicate. I didn't have a desire to share my opinions or participate in small talk because I both didn't want to and my conversational skill had degraded so much from years of isolation. It made it so that forcing myself to initiate or be more outgoing was painful because it felt fake. But I could see in others what I lacked, and I would turn that on myself, how I was inadequate for not being able to form and maintain relationships. And I would relate this back to romantic relationships where you are supposed to share yourself with the other person, which had historically not worked out.
My attitudes towards speaking have changed much in the past couple months. I never was much of a talker, especially around new people. It just doesn't come naturally to the degree I know it's supposed to, or at least does for the majority of people. It wasn't always an issue, but now it's likely stemmed from over 5 years of attempted isolation rather than some pre-existing condition. It's not something that worries me anymore that I'm not a great socializer. I'm content with the people around me. Just last year, this wasn't true. I was looking to others to see how people interact, and I couldn't put myself in their place. I didn't want to force myself into a certain personality type because it wouldn't match who I am to be personable in that kind of way. To do that would be fake, simply not who I've become. And while this was my sole reason for not changing, now I don't have the desire to change. I'd have to say that this is an extension of my feelings of insincerity if I changed, but my lack of socialization is something I recognize as tolerable instead of wishing it could somehow be different. I still people watch and draw comparisons, but it doesn't beat me out of shape as much anymore, though it is an as much situation. It's important to acknowledge that it still affects me, that I don't seem to act fittingly. The disdain is from what other people's perception of me is due to a lack of socialization rather than the social skills themselves. It doesn't bother me that I can't talk to people well, It's more about the impression I give off. I've had people say they thought I was pretentious before they knew me because of how little I would respond. That's what sticks with me. I'd rather be seen as socially inept than stuck up. Because I don't intend to come across as holier than thou. I'm just inept, so I keep to myself to sidestep discomfort for both parties. Sometimes people suggest things and I just go along with them even when I don't agree. This is due to the fact that when I don't object, it is assumed I hold the same core values and aspirations. I don't see the point in bringing up a fundamental or extremely deep-rooted value disagreement because under no circumstances would either of us change our mind. It's easier to keep my mouth shut so that I'm seen more normal than what I really am. I only do this because I don't want the preferential treatment for my differences in either direction, good or bad. I want the presumption of normality. This is how I see it. I can be honest and concern the person over something that will never change and is uncontrollable, or I can say nothing and they can assume we both function in a similar way and I avoid the whole trouble. An example of this would be a recent phone call with my parents. Near the farewell, they said they're available to talk whenever, but I don't see myself calling someone up just to talk. This is something that I would never tell anyone because revealing to that extent may be hurtful, even if it is truthful. There's no aversion to them or anyone else. I don't want to share much of what I'm thinking. And I can connect the dots from this to my lack of close relationships. Sharing unprompted things with people leads to other conversations, which in turn grows relationships. The majority of the time you aren't overbearing. People like to hear from you. I know because I share the same feeling, just not about myself.
And all this would relate to my desire to live. It's the same things I was thinking about in high school when I was actively planning to kill myself.
I'm past my expected expiration date, which makes the life experience much more strange. Nothing is interesting or fun anymore, or at least not as it used to be. I wake up in the morning out of pure obligation. Depersonalization is the only thing I see on my horizon while I continue to simply take up space. I'm not even frustrated that this will never go away. I feel defeated. It leaves me with the issue of having no reason to live. I think meaningful life can only be reasoned to be building substantive relationships, whatever those relationships may be. But where does that leave me when I don't have that same drive that everyone else has to commune? There are too many things I feel I'm unable or unwilling to do that wouldn't allow me to mix with people in any intimate capacity. The conflict between the parts of me that say I won't find my fit and the parts that say I can is leaning more and more towards the first outcome. It's not in a way which is solely a doubt of my own ability, it's also my desire to. I don't find satisfaction in interaction. I think I overemphasize the importance of personal interaction when a deeper problem lies of purpose, and if purpose is a requirement to continue living. Against purpose's rebuttal would be to live for the sake of living, but I do not like to live. Therefore, I have no reason to without some purpose. Cessation would be preferred to preferring anything, but this is predicated on the fact that life is altogether wicked. I can fully realize how most people would not think this because they have things to live for. They have feelings and think they are real. They care, and I largely do not.
Returning to school, I was beginning to feel better. Spending more time with friends over break helped ground me, and I was looking forward to progressing to new classes. But school came as a package deal with memories of last semester. I was thinking about her a lot more. Not in any decent way. Thoughts of our relationship were intertwined with and overshadowed by the sexual element of it. I was lingering on thoughts, mentally masturbating to the thought of a girl I sent through my emotional ringer. I got a message from her. We started talking again, and soon enough, we're hanging out again. We would sit together under her lofted bed and watch movies. After a couple times, I made up my mind. National Treasure was on. I asked,
"What is this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are we? What is our relationship to each other?" "Well, you know what I want."
I still liked her. Enough time had passed to where all the issues I had with my ability to maintain a relationship only a month prior could no longer be conceptualized. I said I missed her. I missed spending time with her. Her laugh, her idiosyncrasies, how she both liked and hated when people touched her ears, the way she loved me. We made up and sat together until the movie finished. In many ways, things picked up like we never broke up, but there were significant cracks waiting to turn to fissures. One night when Trevor and I were in the skate park, she messaged me saying she wanted to talk. At the time, I was wearing Heelys, a prison jumpsuit, and a cheap foam pumpkin face mask the school put in a care package. Parents could pay for the school to deliver themed gift bags to students. Trevor's mom got one. They had about the quality you could expect from a school. I told Trevor I needed to make a stop, and then rolled into one of the laundry rooms where she was waiting. She couldn't take me seriously with how I was dressed, so she had me take off the mask. It was a conversation that required me to appear and to be genuine. She was worried that I didn't like her, that I would break things off again. The consequences of getting back together after self-destructing never crossed my mind before. I'd never considered my actions had sown doubt in the stability of the relationship, especially since I felt great at the time. I could see no problems with our relationship or how I acted in it. Even in that state of mind, it wasn't hard to understand why she felt that way. I thought things could be different this time. I knew why I felt the way I did when I broke up with her, and I would be honest when those feelings started to rise again. At least that's what I told her. It wasn't disingenuous. That was how I felt at the time, but as soon as I began to feel inadequate, it would be the only feeling that mattered. Trevor came around every few minutes, and I would motion him to do another round through the basement. The pressure of someone waiting cut the conversation off shorter than it should have been. She didn't want to keep him waiting on us. Her family was coming to visit her during Mardi Gras. One of her friends and her sister had come to visit earlier on last fall, and to my surprise, I was able to get along with them well. This should have given me some confidence in meeting her whole family, but my mind immediately turned to Phenibut. All I had to do was survive a dinner, yet it was too much to ask of a sober mind. Sporadic drug use was one of the many things I didn't tell her. I had to work on Sundays from open to 5. I was a barback, and my employer would run a brunch deal on Sundays, making their mornings busier than a bar should be at noon. 3 bottles of champagne in ice buckets, fish bowls full of mixed drink. It was miserable to clear those tables. Fortunately, this gave me time. Time to both mentally prepare and to not think. Time for Phenibut to kick in, and less time with her family, meaning a greater chance of me giving a good impression. We were to meet in Chinatown at 6. They had spent the day there and would wait for me to get dinner. My train was stuck at the Chicago station. People were passing around stories that I could overhear. A guy's on the tracks. A guy killed himself. A naked guy was running on the tracks and escaped the police. I stood on the train for 20 minutes before getting up. The wait was eating into the short amount of time I had. By now, I wouldn't be able to change out of my work clothes. But I was high, and frankly having a great time, all things considered. Smiles all around as I walked the 10 or so blocks across the river to the loop where my journey could continue. I ended up getting on a red line train they ran above ground to avoid the tunnels now occupied by police, right to Chinatown, and just on time. The nervousness subsides as I see the group waiting for me. It's time to perform. Hug from mom, hug from sister, handshake from dad. It was funny how much she resembled her mom, looks and mannerisms. And then I was a little freaked out at the similarities I had to her dad, all in temperament. He was a more reserved type, but still initiated much of our conversations. We had to look around in a few restaurants for a place to eat. In one that didn't work out, he asked me a question as we waited for the rest to go to the bathroom.
Do you get easily bored?
I told him no. I can usually sit with myself. On the train, I don't go on my phone. I look out the window and zone out. He liked that answer. He was the same. But the better question came later when we sat down at a hot pot place. I asked how their trip had been and what they did today. They all collectively, and at the same time, told me how they had run into a fire and brimstone train preacher. Our guy had been confronting and following people with the whole microphone and speaker setup. Some of the audience would talk back and explain their plights, then going on to, "Why would a loving God do this to me?" She and her family never talked to him, but being fellow audience members, they got to hear everything. They were laughing over the whole situation.
Wait, are you a Christian?
A smile crosses my face. What I never told her is that I had been attending a Bible study in house church for nearly half a year. That Bible study was different from others I had attended, very close-knit. It was headed by a Tamil couple, Brother Satya and Sister Monica. During my first semester of college, I had differential equations from 5 to 640. There was a process to the rest of my day. I'd leave out the back entrance of the lecture hall to arrive at the Commons before the edible food shut down at 7 o'clock. Then I'd go rot in my room until I was too tired to stay up any longer. For some reason, I went out the main entrance instead, and there we met. He was handing out pamphlets and attempting to get the attention of the people passing by. After I stopped, he invited me to the Bible study, which was happening in 20 minutes. I was riding the high of the new college experience, and I felt high while talking to him, smiling and staring into his eyes the entire time as my peripheral vision started to distort. It took a month before anyone else began showing up to Bible study. Until then, it was me, Brother Satya, Sister Monica, their baby son Judah, and a guitar that was always slightly out of tune. We would sing songs. I don't know why, but there were slight differences in the lyrics to songs I already knew. Specifically, I remember the song Cornerstone having slightly different lyrics, and it wasn't pieces taken from the hymn Cornerstone was based on. We would use the same melody of modern songs, but occasionally change one or two lines to something that didn't rhyme. All of us sang out of tune, but I loved it. It felt intimately special. Every teaching started with a prayer. Sentences started, ended, and were interrupted with, "Lord Jesus, Lord." As custom, I did not pray out loud. My prayers were not like theirs. The fact led to feelings of inadequacy and the fear that they would criticize the words I spoke. I never prayed in front of them. I used the words I use in everyday life for prayer. I drop the formalities and avoid religious words because they sound disingenuous when I'm the one speaking them. But, to their credit, the words they used were their everyday vocabulary. Brother Satya would then preach over a chapter of the Bible. The amount of time we would spend together depended on how long a chapter was, unless one was so long he split it into 2 weeks. But even then, his method of teaching was strange to me. For example, we began reading our chapter for the week, Revelation 2, but halfway through, a detour would occur and we would start on another related section. In this example, we jumped to Numbers 20. Most of the reading and preaching would occur in this other section, but week by week we would progress a chapter in the primary book. Much later on, meetings and Sunday service were moved to Brother and Sister's apartment in Hyde Park. I would catch a ride with another student at my school named Karan, the group now having 5. That might have been the most spiritually fit I had been up until then. Apologetics was a major interest of mine at the time. The arguments for and against the existence of God, the historicity of Jesus, basically anything I found compelling or common sticking points. At the time, I felt like I had a spiritual connection. I said yes. There was silence for a bit, a kind of, oh. I assured that I wasn't offended. Her dad then said he used to be a Christian when he was younger, but stopped believing, now being a spiritual, not religious type. Immediately, I'm getting reasons for why he lost faith, and I loved it. Knowing some kind of response was needed, I pre-qualified I didn't have the best answers, but I gave what made sense to me for what is known as the problem of pain. Surprisingly, I was the one getting rooted for as I was trying to lighten the expectations of my ability to suitably respond. There were no blowouts. There's a good sense of understanding, enough so that I cross-talked about religion with her dad most of the night. I walked with them to their hotel, still mostly conversing with Dad, but now about the architecture and city planning of Chicago. Eventually, we said our goodbyes, then she and I went back to campus. I'd pulled it off. Things were going well. No feeling like a lit bomb, no self-loathing, no insecurity, no obsessions, a brief period of contentment. We would mostly hang out together in my dorm. I always looked forward to getting the knock on my door and seeing her. I want to stop here. I couldn't even tell you why I put that down. Those emotions are the reality I would like to be true, but it's not reality. Normally, I would edit out lies like that, but in many instances, I hold two opposing things as true in my mind at the same time. I could go from thinking that nothing is wrong with our relationship to being so awfully cynical I was sure I would break up with her for the very same reasons as I did before. The doubts and failures of the day by day I erase in service of romanticizing memories. It's egregious enough that I almost forgot about one of my worst moments within our relationship, something that she never knew. What's more embarrassing than saying you broke up with someone is saying you got back together. I never told my parents. To save myself from having that conversation and, implicitly, another inevitable second breakup conversation. A portion of me thought I would try to make things work. The remainder knew I would implode.
I love you.
We had been together a while. I was thinking of when I should say it. I thought I felt it, but when the time came for me to reciprocate what she just said, there was a hint of doubt. I still said it, but as our night together ended, as soon as I shut the door, that hint of doubt grew and tore me apart. It's all fake. There had been difficulty for me in saying, I love you for some time. Years prior, I had stopped saying it to my parents. The feeling I got after saying it progressively got worse than saying nothing. My I love you was out of convenience instead of affection, and I was painfully aware of that truth. She and I were hanging out in my dorm on one of the weekends Trevor went back home. We were lying in bed watching a movie, and when it ended, neither of us got up or put something else on, just laying there. The screen times out, and eventually I'm on top of her. My apprehension is overpowering. We both knew what was supposed to happen next. We'd talked about it before. I bought condoms, the timing was right, and we both wanted to. Every indicator pointed in one direction except for one thing. Sex was talked about within Bible study fairly often, and even more so when Brother Karan and I were talking outside of the group. Having accountability with a person with similar problems is powerful. Powerful enough to rip me out of that state of mind. The dread of having the choice to either lie or tell the disappointing truth.
I've got cold feet.
She didn't understand what I meant.
No, not in a physical way. My actual feet aren't cold.
The message got across. No questions asked. Everything was fine. We just fell asleep. Over the following weeks, the sexual guilt had both turned into and mixed with inadequacy and unfeeling. Full doom mode. I can't hold a conversation. I don't know what to do. I don't know why someone would want to be with me. I'm defective. I'm a waste of time. They're going to get sick of me once they see me enough. Last time the relationship ended because I wallowed in those feelings until they became unbearable. But this time I was going to be upfront. I wanted things to be different. We met in a lounge downstairs. I was nervous, but it wasn't an end-of-the-world nauseating dread. For all she knew, this was routine. I'm uncomfortable with sex because it involves me. The topic was hard to broach, but I owned this silence. I initiated this, and eventually what needed to be said had to get out.
I don't want to do anything sexual anymore. My faith has really been weighing on me. Is that fine with you? Yeah, you know that's not why I'm dating you. I know. Is there anything else?
Before this, my answer would have been no. Sex was my intended scope for the night, but her question made everything else stewing in me come to the forefront. The honesty I wanted to convey came out as poorly phrased as it possibly could.
I'm starting to lose feelings for you.
A true statement with no context. It wasn't because of her, but for some reason I never explained why. And when she took it as me wanting to break up, I didn't stop her. The reality of my emotions and the hurt I'd just caused compounded my self-loathing. If I feel this way, I shouldn't even be in relationships. I am defective. Being honest about it only sows more doubt and wounds the other person for something they can't control. The walls close in and the visual snow magnifies. Here I am again.
You know this is the last time, right? I know.
I hugged her. Her arms never moved. And I knew it was more than meaningless. It was an insult. To me, I was always doing a favor by removing myself from someone's life. I apologized as she walked away. There isn't anything I can think of that she did wrong. In fact, she was everything I needed at the time. She loved me unconditionally. She was upfront about what she felt and what she wanted, but I couldn't handle it. My self-perception is most important. Everyone else is neglected. And if someone has different ideas about me, they would get torched in my self-immolation. I made it halfway to returning to my dorm before I started to break down. I sat in one of the random chairs strewn around the basement hallways and started praying out loud.
Is this what I should have done?
At my desk, I began to write.
That is the end of Sarah. I don't feel good about putting her through this. I just know it won't work. Otherwise, I don't feel anything. I'm dull. There's no point in getting high or going to sleep when I still have to live with my reality. For some reason, I forget about the pain I cause people due to our fundamental differences. I didn't even plan on doing it today, even though I well knew it would come eventually. But I think she knew as well. No more tears left to cry. They've already been. I can't do it anymore. Not just for the reason of hurting people, but for the fact that I want to be alone. I can't see myself walking the aisle or raising a kid or spending a lifetime with someone if I can't even hold a minute-long conversation without forcing myself into being someone I'm not. I'm tired of living. I don't see the point of being here when I lack the attachment that keeps people on this earth. There are no answers, and I have accepted defeat. There's only a lifetime of nothingness ahead of me to enjoy.